You step into an elevator, and someone you've never met steps in right behind you. The doors close. You don't look at them. You check your phone, or you stare at the numbers ticking upward, and somewhere underneath all of that, your heart rate has quietly picked up. Nothing has happened. Nothing is going to happen. Statistically, this stranger is almost certainly just going to their floor, thinking about their own day, not even registering you exist. But the real answer is far stranger. Your brain doesn't actually know that, and it's not going to take your word for it either. Right now, in this exact moment, some ancient part of your nervous system is running a threat calculation on every unfamiliar face you pass, every stranger who sits a little too close, every unknown voice behind you on a quiet street. You've probably never noticed this happening because it happens beneath the level of conscious thought, but it's happening constantly. And it happens whether the stranger is dangerous or not. Why would evolution build something so seemingly irrational? To answer that, you have to go back further than cities, further than villages, further than agriculture itself. For most of human history, you lived in a small group. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar spent decades studying primate social structures and proposed something now known as Dunbar's number, the idea that the human brain evolved to comfortably track roughly 150 meaningful social relationships. Not a random guess. A number tied directly to the size of your neocortex, the part of your brain responsible for social reasoning. Think about what that number actually means. For nearly your entire evolutionary history, almost everyone you ever saw you already knew. Your entire social world was small enough to memorize. Faces belonged to names. Names belonged to histories. Histories told you exactly how much to trust someone. A stranger in that world wasn't just unusual. A stranger was almost a contradiction in terms. If a face didn't belong to your group, it very often belonged to a rival one. And rival groups were one of the leading causes of violent death throughout much of human prehistory. This is where it gets uncomfortable. Anthropologist Napoleon Chagnon, studying the Yanomamo people of the Amazon, documented extremely high rates of intergroup conflict, much of it triggered by encounters between people who did not recognize each other as part of the same community. Unfamiliar faces weren't just socially awkward. In some environments, they were a leading predictor of danger. Your brain quite reasonably built a shortcut around this. Psychologists call it the in-group, out-group bias. And it shows up astonishingly early. Developmental psychologist Catherine Kinsler ran a series of studies showing that infants as young as a few months old already show measurable preferences for faces and voices that match familiar social groups over unfamiliar ones. Babies. Before language, before culture even has a real chance to teach them anything. The wiring is already there. So here's the twist. That elevator you stepped into a moment ago didn't trigger fear because your brain did the math and concluded this specific stranger is a threat. It triggered a much older, much blunter alarm: unfamiliar equals unknown and unknown equals unverified. Your nervous system isn't asking, is this particular person dangerous? It's asking a far more ancient question. Do I have enough information to know this person is safe? And when the answer is no, your body defaults to caution because for the overwhelming majority of human history, caution around strangers kept you alive, and false alarms at worst just cost you a slightly awkward elevator ride. This is a survival strategy built on asymmetry. Trusting a dangerous stranger could get you killed. Distrusting a harmless one costs you almost nothing. So evolution didn't optimize your gut instinct for accuracy. It optimized it for cost. Better to flinch 1,000 times at nothing than to fail to flinch once at something real. Neuroscientist Ralph Adolphs has spent years studying how the human amygdala, the brain's rapid threat detection center, processes unfamiliar faces. His research shows the amygdala activates more strongly and more quickly in response to unfamiliar faces than familiar ones, often before the rest of the brain has consciously identified who it's even looking at. This happens in milliseconds. Long before your reasoning mind gets a vote, your amygdala has already cast one. This explains something almost everyone has felt but rarely names directly: that flicker of unease walking past a stranger at night. That subtle recalibration when someone unfamiliar sits down next to you on a train. You're not imagining it, and you're certainly not being irrational in some clinical sense. You're running software installed hundreds of thousands of years before locks, before streetlights, before background checks existed. Here's what makes this especially strange in the modern world. You now spend your entire life surrounded by strangers. Cities put more unfamiliar faces in front of you in a single subway ride than your ancestors would have seen across several lifetimes. Your ancient alarm system was calibrated for a world where a stranger was rare and possibly significant. It was never calibrated for a world where hundreds of strangers pass you before lunch, and yet the alarm still fires every single time, quietly in the background, because it doesn't know the rules have changed. There's an odd comfort buried in this reframing, though. That wariness isn't a personal flaw, it isn't social anxiety, and it isn't paranoia in the clinical sense. It's an inheritance, a survival tool handed down by every ancestor who ever misjudged a stranger and lived to pass their caution forward, and every ancestor who trusted too easily and didn't. Interestingly, the same mechanism that makes you wary of strangers also explains how quickly that wariness can dissolve. Studies on brief, repeated exposure show that unfamiliar faces seen even a handful of times start registering as familiar, and the amygdala's threat response drops accordingly. This is why the stranger on your daily commute eventually starts to feel like part of the background. Your brain isn't being tricked. It's simply updating the same ancient system that once needed real time, real proximity to sort friend from threat. So the next time you feel that flicker of unease around someone you don't know, in an elevator, on a street, in a waiting room, you don't need to fight it or feel embarrassed by it. You're not overreacting to the present. You're reacting with perfect evolutionary logic to a past that lasted far longer than the world you actually live in now. Because the truth is, your brain was never trying to figure out if this particular stranger is dangerous. It was just trying to keep you alive long enough to find out.